It's great to be here. And tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the roles of savanna and human evolution. Now, today we stand at about a little over 8 billion people on Earth. It's a lot. And we are just about everywhere on Earth, right? We occupy virtually every single landmass, and we live in a stunning variety of environments. That's a success story for now. And why are we so successful at living in all of these different environments, basically dominating the world, and also, of course, changing it to what we need? Now, a huge part of the success is due to our really high level of adaptability, right? Our ability to really just live anywhere and use the resources that are there. And for modern humans, a major part of that adaptability has to do with our culture. Our ability to use culture, our technological innovations as a way to mediate with the world rather than biological adaptations. And I believe Sarah's going to talk more about that today. But I am not, because I don't actually study human culture or the evolution of it. What I really want to explore tonight is the foundations of that adaptability. Early on in our lineage, when did it arise? Why did it arise? So I only have 20 minutes, so you will not get the detailed version today. However, I just really want to kind of cover the sort of top parts of it so that you have a bit of a, so you can think about this every time that you go out. I mean, think about, here we are, we live in Phoenix, in a desert, right? That every time you go out those doors of your home, of the classroom, of where you work, that you think about where this really extreme ability to adapt might come from. Ever since Darwin, major evolutionary events in human evolution have been linked to environmental shifts. And our lineage originated between 6 to 7 million years ago, right at the transition from a really stable and warm Miocene to this increasingly unstable and cooling Pliocene, right? And what's especially important that's associated with that environmental instability and cooling is the change in vegetation through time. So what we're looking at here is this sort of contraction of really heavily wooded vegetation into and the expansion of much more open grasslands. And you can see that sort of focused on Africa here, where you see sort of where we go from a lot of greens to more yellows and sort of these olive greens. All right. Now, what does that have to do with us? Right? Take a look at this photograph. Nothing strikes you as odd, right? Bunch of people walking and standing on two legs. But that is really weird. It's a really weird way to locomote and to just live, to just basically stand on two legs all the time. And not out of choice, but because we have to. For 4 million years, there's been a lot of adaptations that's happened to our body that has allowed us to basically stand and walk bipedally extremely efficiently, right? And it's been refined over 4 million years since its appearance. And we focus on this particular adaptation because arguably, this is what allowed us to become us. The freeing of our hands allowed for all of the biological and cultural innovations that followed afterwards. Think about the next time you're on your phone, messaging someone, right? On social media, everything. None of it would be possible if our hands weren't freed. And so this is why we focus so heavily on this, and that often this is related and correlated, and this is a characteristic of us that we sort of mark as the very beginnings of our lineage. This is what sets us apart from all other primates, okay? And so this is an incredibly important adaptation. So this is a really fundamental question for us. What were the environmental conditions under which bipedalism arose? Because why, right? We can't really answer that yet, unfortunately, but at least we can talk about what are these environmental conditions. And for a very long time, if you think back to that map of the contraction of woodlands and forests and expansion of grasslands, it was hypothesized that bipedalism, and therefore the origin of hominins, was really associated with savannas, okay? And that it was the emergence of these grasslands that led to bipedalism. That as the trees, clusters of trees got farther and farther apart, hominins had to sort of walk further and further in between these stands of trees in order to get the resources that they needed. And so the efficiency of bipedalism increased, and this is why it all arose. Now, in recent years, we've recovered a lot of fossils from sort of the most basal part of our lineage. Really, really, really close to our origination, if not at the point of origination. And we've also really refined our paleoenvironmental reconstructions. There's been a lot of methodological work that's been done, new evidence, new fossil sites, lots and lots of advances in the last 15, 20 years that has really started to bring this back as a question under debate, where people are going, is it really true? How important were savannas? And so to take a look at this and explore this, I want to sort of go through these 4 questions with you tonight. What is a savanna? What were the paleohabitats of the basal hominins? What were the habitats of the hominins that followed them? And then also, what was the impact of these sort of environmental conditions on hominin evolution? Now, before I do that, I do want to just say briefly, very briefly, sort of the evidence that we look at in order to answer these questions. Fossils, right? That seems kind of obvious, and these are fossils of hominins, fossils of animals, footprints, also fossils, and fossils of plants as well, right? Seeds, fruits, wood, pollen, leaves, phytoliths, which are these silica structure of plants. So once the plant rots away, there's these silica structures that's left, and they're preserved, and they tell us a lot about what plants were there. And then also the geology and sedimentology. This is a really important part of our evidence as well, understanding the depositional environment in which those fossils were formed. It tells us an awful lot, right? So this is the evidence from which we can derive answers to our questions. So what is a savanna? And I am going to guess that for most people, when I say savanna, you think of a grassland, right? Like that picture on the upper right-hand corner there. Grassland, maybe a few trees here and there. And it's true, that is a savanna, but so are all those other habitats that I picture there. Those are all savannas too, because savanna really just means that the ground is covered with grass, that there's grass cover. So by definition, savannas are actually highly heterogeneous habitats. They're part of a heterogeneous landscape. You can have savannas where, so they're on a continuum, you can have a savanna where it's much more wooded, not so much grass, and then ones that has a lot of grass and no trees, maybe just 1 or 2. So remember that, because this heterogeneity and this definition of savanna is actually really important to how we understand hominin paleoecology. So what were the habitat of these basal hominins? And these are the ones that are found sort of between that 6 and 7 million year range. They're found in Ethiopia, in Kenya, and in Chad. They're very primitive looking. Okay? They have small brains, and they are found, it looks like their habitats, they've all been reconstructed as these really heavily wooded, next to water type of habitats. Right? Much sort of woodier, much more heavily wooded than habitats of later hominins. And all of them, the early ones, the really early ones next to water. And here's the really interesting thing about them. Now, we don't have skeletal parts of most of them. We don't have complete skeletons, except for one that's later, Ardipithecus ramidus. But it does look like these basal hominins were probably facultative bipeds. So that means that they were not obligate bipeds. They did not have to walk on two legs. They did when they were on the ground, but when they were in the trees, as pictured in this reconstruction, they were probably on all fours. So that emphasizes how important sort of this arboreal context, right, the tree context, was to these basal hominins, that they were probably still really utilizing those resources. They were these groups, populations in transition. Right? Trees are really important, but they were still standing up and walking on two legs when they were on the ground. And what were the paleohabitats of the group that comes after, right? And this includes Australopithecus afarensis, the species that Lucy belongs to. For a very long time, Lucy was basically it. Like Lucy's skeleton, the site where she was from, Hadar, and other contemporaneous sites like Laetoli in Tanzania, where other afarensis specimens are also found, was kind of how we understood early hominin evolution, early hominin habitats. And, but now we have a lot of different sites that span from Ethiopia down to Tanzania, and also other hominin taxa, where contemporaneous to afarensis, but not the same species. And what we're finding is that these hominins lived in mosaic habitats. So remember that heterogeneous habitat talked about that was savannas. Like they lived in these really heterogeneous habitats, but each site had different proportions of grass cover and woody cover. And also had different levels of surface water availability. So overall, this group of hominins were just living in a really heterogeneous habitat and landscape, and just depending on where they were, the proportions of vegetation types were different. And this is just a summary, just to sort of the major sites where there's afarensis that's found, to sort of illustrate the variety. They're all mosaics, right? It's just that they have slightly different types of vegetation. And we can kind of dig into that a little bit deeper by comparing them. And this is a graph that sort of depicts the association afarensis sites and bovids, which is a group of ungulates, hoofed animals, that have very specific habitat preferences. They're found in the hominin fossil record, they're ubiquitous, they're very common, they're quite, they're large parts of the fauna, lucky for us, so we use them a lot and understand hominin paleoecology. So here is a group of bovid taxa that are found generally in sort of more open and more arid types of habitats. Here's a group of bovids that are found, you can see that they cluster together, right, that are found in more wooded types of habitats, more woody vegetation, more cover. And then a group of bovids that are found in either much sort of wetter, so lots of surface water, and or wooded habitats. And what this distribution of bovids can tell us, is that really, when you look at this graph, you can interpret it as that these sites are going to be on this continuum. On the y-axis is more woody cover to less woody cover. And then on the x-axis, sort of wetter to drier, okay? And this is where the fossil afferences sites situate. Laetoli is here on the sort of drier, more open part. Ronzomile in the woodier part and also wet. And by wet I mean surface water, not rainfall. Okay, so this is water that is there on the surface in the form of rivers or lakes, and then also groundwater in the form of springs. And then Hadar, where Lucy is from, it's really wet and open-ish. And then Cantus is a new site from Kenya, and looks like it's sort of kind of in the middle of everything, and it's more open than Ronzomile, but it's also more closed than Laetoli, and it does have water on this. It has a large river or a lake there as well. And so what this is really showing is that these sites, although all mosaics and all about the same age and all have afferences, right, that the vegetation there, right, their environments are actually pretty different when you look at on a broad level. So what's the implications of that for the local populations of afferences that live there? They're dealing with different pressures, right, depending on which site they're at. And we can see differences in populations of afferences. For example, Laetoli, not many there, 30,000 specimens of fauna, of mammals. Do you know how many hominins we have from Laetoli? 30. Hadar? A lot more. Hundreds of specimens. And I can't remember the exact top of my head now, but not quite 30,000 faunal specimens, but a lot, right? So when we look at the proportions, we're talking about, Laetoli, less than 0.2% of the fauna is hominins, and then Hadar more than 2%. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you compare them to each other, it's quite a lot. So what does this mean, right, for these afferences? Now, when you have heterogeneous habitats, what that means is that you also have a diversity of food resources, right, that's available. And what we can see here from these chemical analysis of enamel of early hominins is that afferences and their contemporary species have a really wide range of food. There you can see that it spans quite a bit. Now, the interesting part is that these earlier hominins, right, things a little bit earlier than afferences, they are really focused on food items from bush and trees. They're not really incorporating resources from grass or sedges. That's on the landscape, but not as much of it, but they're not utilizing that. And so what this suggests, that this broadening of a dietary niche in our lineage, which certainly sort of characterizes today, first appears probably around 3.6 million, that time range. And was probably made possible by this heterogeneous landscape that hominins find themselves in. If it was all homogeneous, it was just one type of vegetation, then they also would not have had access, right, to this variety. And so I kind of want to end with just take-home messages, right? First, that hominins and bipedalism likely originated in woodland-dominated savannas. So, still savannas, but not the savannas that we all think of when we think savannas, right? It's a really complex place. Certainly didn't arise in forests, right? But it's the savanna where there's a lot of woodland, where it's much more vegetated in terms of woody cover. And that this probably set the stage, right, for these hominins to being able to utilize all the resources that were there on this heterogeneous landscape. And that when we think about our ecological adaptability today, how good we are at that. I mean, we're really good at that. That's why we're all here. We are a total success story. That the foundation of that may be found 3.6 million years ago, when these hominins, early hominins, walking around a landscape, access to all of these different types of food, the trees, the grass, not necessarily grass blades, the seeds, the underground roots, all of these, and that they could utilize all of that. And that may have been our first step to basically our dominance today, due to our ability to adapt to just about any ecological condition. Thank you.